So, Dr. Kim, what does it mean to cover our spouse's vulnerabilities?
I think I like to look at it as all of us have strengths and weaknesses. And I think in marriage, God's design really is for those to balance each other out. In other words, what Nancy and I've seen over the years, when not in an area that I am weak, she seems to be strong. In an area that she's weak, I seem to be strong. So I think that balances us out. I think it makes our marriage better. And so I think we just kind of cover each other's vulnerabilities that way. And I think that's one of the great things about marriage and God's design. It's so interesting in counseling couples over the years, is that I see that play out in couples all the time. What happens a lot of time is they focus on the weakness of the other person and really don't value that they have the strength to balance that out. And so they become critical of the other person's weakness.
Exactly, Dr. Kim. I think that's the key here. I think far too often that's what we want to do is we see the weakness in our spouse and we're not weak in that area. And so we kind of want them to rise to the challenge and be more like us, like, hey, why can't you do this? Or
Right.
let me teach you how to do this. It's my responsibility to make you better in this area instead of just having the grace and the mercy to cover their vulnerabilities. And I
Yeah.
really just love that team mentality of, we should lift each other up where we are weak because we are all vulnerable in different ways. So instead of exposing our spouse's vulnerabilities, why don't we shield them and protect them and cover them where they are weak out of love for them?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because if you don't do that and you're being critical of your spouse, you're basically telling your spouse, you're broken and I'm going to fix you. And
Exactly.
that wasn't God's design. And, we talk about teams so much. And I think we talk about it so much because it's so important. And I think this is an area that it's extremely important. And just think what that does for your marriage when you really grab onto that and you really do cover each other's vulnerabilities. I mean, one, you feel protected by the other person. You're going to feel more connected. It's going to give you a sense of security. There's so many positives to doing it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the devil's biggest schemes for marriages is to make us believe that we're each other's enemies, that we're on opposing teams, as opposed to being on the same team. And so God really wants us to be on the same team, to be unified. And when it comes to covering our spouse's vulnerabilities, I love the imagery of that. So where this phrase came from for me is our marriage counselor said this to us earlier this year, of just asking us how, Christina, how are you going to cover Dylan's vulnerabilities and how is he going to cover yours? And to me, I see a picture there and it's really
Yeah.
pretty.
Yeah, I think it is too. I think it's a great way to look at it. And I think that, when in the Seven Secrets book, I talk about fighting for your marriage and we talk about doing the pivot and looking at things together. And so if Nancy has a weakness, okay, how do I help her? How do I come alongside her? And I think it's just the more we do that, we are not each other's enemies, like you said. We're not, I'm her advocate, not her adversary. And I think that just getting that in our mind, and then we live out of that instead of living out of a critical spirit or something's wrong with her or him, those kind of things.
Yeah, absolutely. That was really good. I love what you just said there about being her advocate instead of her adversary. That's very tweetable, Dr. Kim.
Well, we'll just
Sometimes when you're talking, I just want to slow clap, but it's just me and you, so I'm not going to slow clap, but yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So why is it so important to do this, to cover each other's vulnerabilities instead of trying to fix our spouse?
Yeah, I think obviously sometimes I know some of my vulnerabilities can be irritating to her, and she probably would wish I was different, wish I would change. But again, I think it's important to the two become one comes to my mind. I mean, I think that's really a picture that we want there. And so what does that mean? If I'm really one with her and God's at the center of it, well, God's not looking at Nancy and being critical. Now, God's not saying, oh, I'm surprised because you're that way. No, God comes along beside us and helps us and works through things with us and accepts us as we are. And I think that's why we try to do that instead of trying to fix our spouse, because trying to fix something doesn't work. I can't control Nancy no matter what. As hard as I would try, there is no way I can control her or fix her. That's God's job. If he wants to make some changes in her, my job is to love her and come alongside her right where she is.
Yeah, that's real good. That's real good, Dr. Kim. And I think we all have to remember too that no one is ever going to be perfect. I think so often the areas where we're strong and when we see our spouses weak in that same area, it's like we want to fix them, but we have to remember that they're never going to be like perfect. They can't be all things to all people. They can't
Right.
be perfect in every area of their life. So, and they're strong in areas where we're weak too. We have to remember
Yes,
that.
exactly. And I think, yeah, I mean, you've got to look at yourself. If I look at myself and I think I'm perfect, then I've got a real problem
Yeah,
because I'm
absolutely.
not, and I never will be in this life. And through God's grace, I can go through this life and live it the way He wants me to. But I'm never going to be perfect, and so it's so unrealistic to expect that of my spouse.
Yeah, that's good. So, can you give us some examples, Dr. Kim, from your own marriage? How does Nancy cover your vulnerabilities?
Well, since I'm almost perfect, no, I'm so
After
far
you
from
just
perfect.
said,
Yeah, so far from perfect. I think of one thing that is, and it's not. I think it kind of is a weakness in some ways. It certainly could be in Nancy's eyes. I mean, when we do social things, I really don't like big parties at all. I would much rather be with just a few couples. Nancy likes big parties, and so what we've done over the years, she knows how I feel about it. She knows that I'm really kind of uncomfortable. That really, I just don't like that. So if we get invited to one, she comes to me and we talk about it. And then one of the things I'll ask her is I'll have her rate it. How much do you really want to go to this? And then I'll tell her how much I don't want to go. I'll rate that. And then we can kind of decide. And so if it's really important to her, we go. But the key is I think she understands it. She's not saying, hey, we got invited to this party. And I said, yes. So suck it up, buddy. No, it's like, okay, we got invited to this. Let's talk it through. Let's talk about, let me tell you who's going to be there, that kind of stuff. And so then it's okay. Even if we go, it's okay because I know her expectations of me are realistic. And not that I mean, once I get somewhere, I'm usually pretty good with people. I just love being with just a small group of people so much more. It's just so more intimate to me. And, at big parties, it's usually that quick conversation. How are you? What have you been doing? How are your kids? Blah, 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 blah. And then you start looking around for, okay, who can I escape to next? And I don't like that very much.
yeah, yeah. And I love that. I love her level of care for you that she would care so much about your needs and what you want that she would. And so I think that's a really pretty picture. I love that. So let me ask you this: when you guys are asking, do you make her go first with the rating and make sure that your number is higher than hers? Is that
Oh,
what you do?
no.
I'm just kidding.
No, that's a good idea. I hadn't thought of that. Uh,
No, 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 no. Yeah, for Dylan, he covers my vulnerabilities in a lot of different ways. One of the things that he does is he really just like fills in the gaps where I'm not good. So dealing with customer service people, I just have like so little patience for like when things are errors, when you have to be on the phone, dealing with a return or dealing with somebody who messed up
yeah,
and didn't do their job.
yeah,
I just have so little patience for that because I love efficiency. And so when they're not being efficient, when they're not being proactive, I'm just like, oof, like, ooh, I get really annoyed really quickly and I lose my patience. And so for Dylan, he's so self controlled, he's so patient. And so instead of looking at me and just saying, like, hey, you need to grow in this, like, you need to get better, be kinder, be more patient, have more self control, he just says, hey, like, I'm going to do it. Like, I know this thing you ordered on Amazon, it got messed up. And so even though you bought it, it's your thing. Like, I'm going to go ahead and take care of it. I'm going to take care of the return. I'm going to call the person and handle it, which is just really kind of him. And then I think another area where he really covers my vulnerabilities is just with the children. Sometimes when he
hmm,
sees me struggling and he
yeah,
sees me starting to lose my patience, he doesn't correct me. He doesn't say, hey, kinder voice, Christina, be kind to your kids. He just kind of steps in and says, okay, like I'll take over. And he'll start disciplining the kids or taking over or let me go
that's so
to a
good.
different room. And it's just so kind of him to not just like judge me and be so critical of the fact that
Right.
I'm not handling a situation well. Instead, he just steps in and helps me, which is really kind.
That's really good. That
Yeah.
really is. I mean, that just shows care, concern, understanding, all the things that we want in our marriage. Basically, that's kind of a picture of.
Yeah.
And what does
Yeah.
it do for you in that situation?
Yeah, it just it makes me feel loved and cared for
Yeah,
and kind of I don't know, it takes the pressure off of like, no, I don't have to be perfect. Yes, I should strive to be kind. I should strive to have more patience, but also here's this beautiful teammate that I have who's willing to fill in my gaps. And it's okay to say, hey, I can't do it all. I can't be all things to all people.
right.
I'm not the most patient person in the world. And so I'm going to tap out and like, thanks be to God, I have someone who's going to tap in for me.
Yeah, that's so good. And
Yeah.
and that that and there's confidence for you in that. And it gives you some freedom
Hmm.
that if he didn't, otherwise it wouldn't go that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, how do you end up covering Nancy's vulnerabilities?
The one I think, and I don't know if I've shared this before, but Nancy and I talk about it a lot, and she shares about it a lot. In early years of our marriage, Nancy, in fact, she had her first panic attack when we'd been married about 6 months. She was in a class, so she was finishing some school stuff after we got married, and she was giving a presentation, had this panic attack, had to run out of the room. And so that started just a series of panic attacks that went on for quite a few years there. And it was, I think during that time, panic attack, there wasn't a lot said about anxiety back then. There wasn't a lot of said about panic attacks. People hadn't really even known what they were very much. And I didn't understand anxiety. I'd never been anxious. I certainly didn't understand panic attacks. And I think early on, it was just like, well, you need to get over this. I can get over it. Why can't you get over it? You don't need to feel that way, that kind of stuff. And then I just realized, well, that's not working. That's actually what that did was just heighten her anxiety. And so I just kind of dug in and started studying and learning everything I could about it. I hadn't dealt with it with someone in counseling before. And I finally found a doctor that was in Oklahoma City at the Health Science Center, and he was working with a doctor at Boston University, and they were studying panic attacks, and they were kind of the leaders in this. So I got with him, and we went to see him, and he began helping me understand it, and also to be able to help Nancy with some medications they're using and things like that. And so I think what I saw that the change there was me realizing that this is a vulnerability of hers. This isn't something she can do anything about. And my role is to come alongside her and help her figure this out as best I could, and to not put her in situations where that's going to be worse. And so I think then, and really, I think with that and the help of that doctor, she hadn't had a panic attack in years and years and years and years. And I learned the times that, like when we were going to travel, it would heighten. If I was going to be gone away for a while, it would heighten. And so we learned to do some things to try to give her confidence before that. And so we kind of worked through it together. But, I think it made such a difference when I decided, okay, I got to accept this.
Yeah, that's good. And I love that. The way I look at that is like you kind of tried to put yourself in her shoes. You tried to, even though you didn't understand what it was
Yeah.
like, even though you didn't understand why she was being anxious or even maybe what that felt like, you were like, well, clearly this is a big deal. Clearly this is a problem for you. And so I'm not going to ignore it. I'm not going to be like, well, that's your problem. But you really made her problems your problem and you wanted
Yeah.
to solve it together. So I love
Yep.
that.
That's
That's
good.
good.
Yeah. Yeah. It really was. And I think that's what it's all about. I think that kind of sums up, what you said about Dylan, what I just talked about Nancy. That sums up a lot of what we're talking about today.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, for Dylan, I think me covering his vulnerabilities, I think when it comes to ministry, God has given us the ability to like partner really well in ministry. So some weaknesses of his is he's not always the most encouraging person or the most sympathetic person. And so in ministry, that can be hard. He's a pastor. And so,
Oh, yeah.
that's a challenge sometimes. And so for me, I don't try to just teach him. I think early on, I just wanted him to be like me because I'm very sympathetic and I'm very encouraging. And so I wanted to teach him what to say and like to be more like me kind of. But over the years, I've just kind of, God has given me the grace to see that that's just a weakness of his and I can fill in the gap. So we do
Mhm.
ministry stuff together. So when I know that there's a sensitive situation and someone's going to need some sympathy, well, we invite them over for dinner so that they're experiencing both Dylan and I together. And we're able to kind of like teamwork that. And I've just seen God do like beautiful things through that. So it's been really cool.
That is so cool. And I think that's such a great example of where you see the strength and weakness balance in that. And, God put Dylan and you both in ministry, and you
Mhm.
both have gifts to minister to people. And so the fact that Dylan values that in you and sees that and knows that you can add a portion to ministry that is difficult for him. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, and it's been really cool just to see us work together in that. So like
Yeah.
now, sometimes when people come over, Dylan will even say like, "Oh, well, I want Christina to speak to that." Like he'll tap me in before me even
That's
having to
cool.
like interject myself because he just knows, oh, Christina's gonna respond to that better. So hey, Christina, what are your thoughts on that? So it's just cool
I
teamwork.
thought that is so cool because I thought you were going to say Dylan gets up and leaves and goes to the store and just
No,
leaves
no,
me
no,
with
no.
it.
I'm out of here. No, no.
I'm out of here. Thanks, Christina's got this covered.
Oh goodness, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, how can we grow in patience with our spouse's weaknesses so that we can do this well? I think so often we get impatient with our spouse's weaknesses, especially when it's something that that weakness we don't experience ourselves.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is. To me, for me, the biggest thing was prayer and asking God to help me have understanding with this, to have compassion, asking to give me patience with it. Those are all things I really needed if I was going to come alongside her because I didn't understand. It was I would try to be compassionate, but it was easy for me to lose it. And my patience wasn't there. And as God gave me those, I think it began to give Nancy that in itself kind of helped calm her down. So I think asking God, like we talk about a lot too, ask God to help you see your spouse through his eyes. Pray for wisdom. But I think you lean into God in those things and you really pray, and God's going to show up in that. He's going to give you answers that you are not going to have by yourself at all.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I think another thing that really helps me to have patience for Dylan is just to try to remember the things that I'm not good at and to remember my own insufficiency. There are so many things that I've tried to work on for so long with so little progress. So remembering my own issues helps me to have grace with his issues. I
Mm,
think of what it says in Romans 7:15 through 20. It says, "For I do not understand what I am doing because I do not practice what I want to do, but I
yeah.
do what I hate. Now, if I do what I do not want to do, I agree with the law that is good. So now I am no longer the one doing it, but it is the sin living inside of me. For I know nothing good lives within me, that is, in my flesh. For the desire to do what is good is with me, but there's no ability to do it. For I do not do the good that I want to do, but I practice the evil that I do not want to do. Now, if I do what I do not want, I am no longer the one that does it, but the sin that lives inside of me." And it's just such a picture of the
Yeah.
war that we're in, right? So even when we want to
Right.
do good, so often we do wrong. And so if we're still living that conundrum, in our own hearts and our own lives, like I think of me and all the things that I've worked on for years with so little progress, if we're still living that, our spouse is still living it too. And so we have to
Yeah.
have that grace and that patience for them because this is the human struggle that we will continue to experience all the days of our life here on earth.
Absolutely. No, I think that's really good. What a great scripture, because I think we all feel that way. I can sit there. I think when she was going through that stuff, I'd think the next day, because a lot of hers came at night, uh, what I could have done, how I'm going to do different next time, and all that kind of stuff. And then get in the moment again and not, because I'm not doing what I wanted to do. And then knowing that God was going to have the answers for me in those situations.
Yeah. And I think we just have to have grace for each other because
Yes.
I think so often we get so impatient with our spouse because it's like, well, I told you before, and you're not supposed to do that. And that's not kind, or that you shouldn't do X, Y, or Z, or this is sin. And yet we keep coming back to it. But we're human. We are sinners. We're going to continue to sin. Yes, we should strive to repent and to turn towards God
Right.
and to leave sin and walk towards holiness, but we're still sinners and it's still very hard. And we're going to, like Paul is saying here, sometimes do the thing that we don't want to do. We know it's wrong and yet we still do it, and we're already beating ourselves up for it. So what we don't need is our spouse being extra critical of us when we fail.
No, I agree. And I think look at your spouse's heart. And if their heart is really, they're trying to change it, they're working on changing, give them a lot of grace right there. But I don't think the other side of that, you don't want to use that as license to keep sinning over and over, just like Paul talks about also. That's not a license to sin. Now we realize those weaknesses. And for me, the sin and things like that, I want to repent of that. And I also want to let God build in me so that I do better in that. So if I do sin again in that, it wasn't, it wasn't because I wasn't trying, and
Yeah,
it's just that
definitely.
it's a process for most of us, I think, in certain things that have been a part of our lives for a long time. Coming out of that is a process and it takes time
Yeah, absolutely. In prayer, I
and
think the
prayer.
more we can confess our sin to God, and the more we can ask for God's help to
Right.
do better and to repent and to walk towards holiness. Like He's the one who's going to help us. We have to abide in Him. He is the branch, and so we have to trust in that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So how has this ended up playing out in the counseling room? Can you give us some more examples in your counseling experience of how couples have kind of learned to cover each other's vulnerabilities?
Yeah, one came to my mind, and this has been a number of years ago. There's a great couple I work with. They had 5 kids, all under the age of 8. And so she was a great mom in a lot of ways, but that time in the evening, like between 5 and 7, when everybody seems to get cranky, and there seems to be so much to be done, and it was really at a point where she was probably, I don't think she was at a nervous breakdown, but I mean, it was really a strain on her, and he was in a job that he couldn't get home till 6:30, so she's living an hour and a half of that time period, and it was pretty right on the nose. It's like she could almost set a clock by it at 5. It's 5 o'clock because I know what's going on here. And so she was stressed, breaking point each night. Her tolerance was gone. Anxiety was coming out of it. She was getting depressed. And so what he did, he said, I'm going to hire a lady to come in from 4 to 8 every night, and she's going to help. She's going to be there to do whatever you need her to do. If you want her to fix dinner that night, if you want her to take care of the kids and bathe them, if you want her to fix to help them with homework, whatever it is. And he found a lady that was willing to do all those things. It was the best money he ever spent. It
Yeah.
changed their lives. He, instead of saying, suck it up, you're the one who had these kids, although he certainly played a part,
Yeah.
that, you know, you gotta do it. No, it was like, okay, this is something I've got to help her with. And this is not forever. This is
Hmm.
a season that we are in. What it did for them as a couple and what it did for her, and seeing my husband saw that, instead of being critical with me, he found a solution for me that really made a difference in my life. That was one of the best examples I've
I
ever
love
heard of.
that. And I
Yeah.
love how they came up with a creative solution. I think
Yes.
far too often we're so narrow focused in our problems. I think far too often we, as a spouse that is struggling, just automatically thinks, well, my spouse needs to solve this by them doing it. Like, I can't do it, so they should just do it.
Right.
Or if you're the spouse who's trying to help the spouse who's struggling, you think, well, if I can't be the one to literally do the, like, to replace the chore or to do the thing, then there is no solution. But this person hired someone else. Like, you can get creative with this. It doesn't mean you literally
Yeah.
have to do it. You can solve their problem without doing it yourself. And so you can get creative. I think far too often we just think, if wife can't do it, husband has to. If husband can't do it, wife has to. When there are a lot of creative solutions that we can
Right.
come up with if we would just stop being so narrow-minded about it and just work together to solve the problem. I think sometimes I find myself wanting to, like, shut myself off to solutions to problem solving for Dylan, because I'm like, well, I don't want to do that. So I just, like, shut it off. But it's like,
Yeah.
it doesn't mean I have to do it, but let's talk about it. Let's get our, like, brainstorming going. Let's think of different ways that we can help each other, because it doesn't mean that it's just one option.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I love that you brought that up, because thinking out of the box helps a lot in a lot of situations. And for them, some people may think, well, we can't afford that. Well, they couldn't afford it either, but he made adjustments in
Yeah.
their,
Sacrifice.
he made some sacrifices so that could happen.
Yeah, and there's tons of creative things you can do, like, I mean, she could have traded off with someone, so maybe the
Yep.
morning times were really good for her. Well, she could have traded off with another mom. She goes and takes, a mom's friends 2 extra kiddos in the morning time when everything's fine anyways, and all the kids are behaving for some reason, but in the evenings when she's really struggling, maybe her neighbor friend who's a mom doesn't struggle in the evening, so she can come over and help in the evenings. There's
Right.
lots of creative,
Right.
and it's just an equal exchange of no money. So there's lots of creative solutions.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we don't think out of the box, or we're afraid to ask somebody. I think what I see when people want to come along and help somebody, they
Mhm.
just do. And so give people a chance to help you in some situations. Don't be afraid to ask.
Yeah, and I think if you're feeling stuck, ask your friends, ask other wiser people at church, ask a counselor. Like,
Right.
get if the two of you can't come up with it together, that's why we have our Christ in our community to help us. So let's work on
Absolutely.
that. It's good.
Absolutely. It's a great time to involve community.
Yeah.
Another one I thought of, and this was, I guess I always remembered it because it was something I always wanted for Nancy, and because she's a realtor, she never really worked much at night. But this lady happened, she did quite a few of her showings at night because the people she worked with, it was usually after work, so sometimes it was dark. She became very fearful, not because something had happened, and maybe I can't remember whether something had happened to another realtor. She'd heard some stories, very fearful. So what had happened? If she couldn't schedule other times, her husband said, "I'll go with you." And so he was always at home in the evenings. And so instead of having her just go out and do that showing by herself, he went with her. Made all the difference in the world. She felt safe. She felt secure. Connected them. It did all the good things we've been talking about her. But here he saw a fear she had. You can call it a weakness or vulnerability, whatever you want to call that there. And he figured out a way to help her with that. And she didn't even ask him. He did it all on his own, which I think made it all the better for him.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. Well, this has been such a great conversation. I hope it has really helped couples see how they can work together as a team. What's your final piece of advice for our listeners today?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was going to say. The team is what I'd want you to see out of that. And the team really is three. When we talk about a cord of 3 strands, it's you and your spouse and God. Don't forget him. When you've got the situation like that, take it to him in prayer. Let him get his wisdom, get his insight, and you'll be amazed at the solutions that you will think of because you took it to him.
Yeah, that's good. Well, for the next 2 weeks, we're taking a podcast break for the summer. Oh, I know. So sad. You're going to miss us so, so much. But be sure
Yes.
to join us back when we come back in August. We're going to be talking about our most asked about topics. We're going to be talking about what to do when you want your husband to lead spiritually and he's not leading. We get asked this all the time. And so we're going to be hitting that topic when we come back in August. So be sure to tune back in then. And hey, as always, if you need anything at all, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. You can always email us at info@awesomemarriage.com or message us over on Instagram. And hey, if you love the show, please share the podcast with a friend. Show us some love on social media and tag us because we love to see that. So share it on social media. It is a really great way to show your support of the show. Have a great day and do something awesome for your marriage today.